I'm Bob Shrum, the director of the Center for the Political Future at USC Dornsife. Welcome to a new semester and a new year of our events. Today we're on Zoom, on our Facebook live streams, on YouTube, and soon on our podcast, Let's Find Common Ground. We will meet and hear from our fall 2025 fellows. We're proud of our fellows program, which brings significant political figures and journalists who cover politics to teach and interact with our students and be part of our events throughout the semester. I will moderate this conversation with Mike Murphy, my one-time adversary, never enemy, and the co-director of the center. And we will try to leave 15 minutes or so for questions at the end. Please put your questions, if you have them, in the chat. First, let me start with this. I want to ask each of the fellows to introduce themselves briefly and then take a minute or 30 seconds to tell us the focus of their study groups for our students. Jim DeBoo.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim DeBoo. My class is titled Politics of Logarithms, and the core of it is I've been a political consultant and a chief of staff, both for governors and speakers, and ran campaigns in California for a long period of time. And the focus is over the last 10 years, what's happened with political discourse and how both social media, logarithms, podcasts, and every other piece of media content has changed over those last 10 years. So the hope is we take a look at it, investigate the good, the bad, the ugly, and how to move forward. And I hope this class is less of someone like me talking to people and actually having people engage and help figure out how to kind of move forward as we navigate these media spectrums.
Great. Frank Lavin. You're silent, Frank. Turn your mic on.
Thank you. Sorry for that. Thank you, Bob. I'm delighted to be here today.
I've known him 30 years. He's never been silent. I'm stunned, but go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, but I had the opportunity to serve on the White House staff for about 8 years, the Reagan White House staff. I went on in the W. Bush administration, serve as ambassador to Singapore, and I spent most of my career in trade negotiations under 41 and 43, a lot of China focus, a lot of Asia focus. So my course is called Statecraft. We're just talking about public policy as a means to an end. What kind of society do you want? What kind of country do you want? What kind of policies help you go down that path? How do you build a coalition? How do you articulate your vision? So politics as it's supposed to be, it's a means to an end.
April Ryan.
Good afternoon here on the East Coast, and I guess it's good morning over there on the West Coast. I am teaching the intersection of independent journalism as it marries with traditional journalism. We're in this moment right now where a lot of the traditional news is out the window, and it has changed and it's shifted. And what is up and coming, you see a lot of the traditional news people leaving the traditional news media, going into independent media, and giving information without fear or favor, and giving the information in some instances that may not necessarily be allowed in traditional news. And I have been at the White House for 28 years, the longest serving Black White House correspondent in history. Can't believe it, a little girl from Baltimore, Maryland, going to USC and teaching for 10 weeks. I am very excited.
We're excited to have you. David Simas.
Thanks, Bob. David Simas. I am, my wife affectionately refers to me as being in the Hack Hall of Fame. I have served at the local level, at the county level, at the state level, at the federal level. I'm still waiting for the UN gig. That's probably not going to come and probably wouldn't count. I served in the Obama White House and was the director of opinion research during the president's reelection campaign in 2012. My whole political life at all of those levels has been about understanding conditions and consequences. The campaigns are about understanding the conditions that exist at the moment and adapting to them. So what I'm going to be talking about, and I can't wait, especially from someone whose life has been in Democratic politics, is Trumpism after Trump. The president is one of the most defining and transformative political figures in American history. He will leave in 2028. But what
Maybe.
what will Democrats and Republicans adapt that they believe will meet the moment that's good for them politically, and what are the things that will be left by the side? So we'll be looking at campaigns in 26, previewing what's happening in 28, and looking at through that lens.
Helen Torres.
Good afternoon, everyone. What a pleasure to be with all of you. I'm Helen Torres. I'm the CEO of HOPE, which stands for Hispanas Organized for Political Equality, one of the largest national organizations with a focus on Latina empowerment. And what we're going to be talking about is the moment that we're living through in our democracy, and our democracy being tested. From automation transforming jobs, and social media and how it's shaping the world, the questions about skills and education, equality, and how do we all belong to this new world order. In my study group specifically, Democracy Rewritten, Build Your Own Country Without Breaking Everything, we'll use the U.S. Constitution as our guiding force, if you will, from the First Amendment of free speech to looking at the 14th and 15th Amendments on equity and voting rights. Each week, you'll hear from community leaders who are tackling these issues in real time, and together we'll draft a new constitution for our new society. The challenge I'll leave everyone with is, if you had a chance, would you even choose a democracy?
Now we're going to ask each of you a specific question and invite any other fellow who wants to comment to give a response. And Mike, of course, will irrepressibly join in with his own insights and questions. April has to leave us early for another commitment, so I want to make sure we get to her before that happens. April, what's it like to be a White House correspondent in the Trump era? How different is it from the situation with presidents who came before? And what are the prospects for a return, if I can borrow a phrase, for a return to normalcy after 2028?
So let me answer the latter. A return to normalcy, what does that look like? After each president, there's a shift and a change, and you hope for access. Access sometimes changes, and that's one of the things, the communication issue. But when it comes to looking at 2028, I think politics is forever changed because of the Trump era. How a president relates to the press, how a president relates to his own party, the other party, the opposing party, as well as the American people. We saw the major shift with Barack Obama taking the middleman out. He didn't have to go to a press secretary. He just went straight to the American public on social media. And that's what Donald Trump does. He is his own hype man. He is his own press person. He is a communications machine, for good, bad, or indifferent. Now, first term versus second term, this term is on steroids. This term, for better or for worse, has totally changed the body politic. It's totally changed the way we look at humanity. Never seen anything like it. I've been at the White House for 28 years. One thing Helen Thomas, the late great Helen Thomas, the dean of the press corps, said, every president does their best. She wasn't here for this president. I don't know what his best is, and I'm not trying to be funny, but every day is chaos. You see everything coming at you through a large fire hose. We have to pick and choose what's what. First term, I was under fire with this president. I got questions. This term, he's very retaliatory. Because of the last term, they've decided to keep me out of the Oval Office and not allow me in the pool, but I still break news. And this president he's a history maker. Is that good? Is that bad? That's up to you to decide, but he has totally changed the press, how a president relates to the press. He's totally changed how this nation looks, feels, tastes, and interacts with one another. And in Washington, D.C. right now, I'm on N Street, just blocks from the White House. There are National Guard walking on corners. It's happening in LA. It's happening in DC. What other city will it happen in? I mean, there's so many different things right now. We would have to take more time to talk about the changes that have happened and how do you get back to normalcy, because everything that he's done now, it's going to take more than 4 years to repair after he leaves, if he leaves.
Any comments? And Mike, you might want to weigh in at this point.
Well, I got a quick follow-up. First of all, thank you all, and thank you for watching out there. We pride ourselves at the center of the outstanding fellows we attract, and I'll pat our Bob and Kami and the staff on the back here. We really have a bumper crop this year. They didn't have to send me out to the waterfront bars of Long Beach to roust any last person to fill a slot. I mean, we have an A+ team, so I'm very excited for the center. Quickly, April, here's something that vexes me as an old partisan, flack and hack. Trump acts illegitimately at a new level, yet he's covered because he holds the office legitimately as president. And I think of the spectacle yesterday with about 50 reporters crammed into the cabinet office where they put on this cabinet show, which would have made Stalin blush. All the, oh my God, those are the prettiest shoes I've ever seen. What a good looking man. I mean, it was unbelievable. Is that necessary? Do we cover should we, or should the media, I should say, I'm an opinion journalist, so it doesn't matter. Should the media cover everything he does with the gilded frame of the presidency around it? Or do you just put a pool camera in there for the show and don't help elevate the stagecraft? It's a tricky question. I'm curious about your view.
You're absolutely right. It is tricky because I think about Mike McCurry, the first press secretary I ever covered, and he now regrets having daily press briefings because of the show, right? But at the same time, what happens if the press isn't there and something happens like a JFK, an assassination or something? The problem is now you have people in that room. Volodymyr Zelensky, why are you not wearing a suit? That's not our place. Or Mr. Zelensky, you finally have a suit on. And then the Ukrainian president goes back, shoots back with some shade to the reporter or whomever he is, Marjorie Taylor Greene's friend who is in the press. I mean, we have changed, but access is important because the American people need to know what's happening at their house. But the antics are the thing that you're talking about. What if something...
Yeah, where he uses the press in a totally performative way while he's covered like it's the Gettysburg Address, because that's the standard of covering a president.
And not only that, and I'm going to put this out there, and this, I'm not trying to go viral. I'm not trying to do anything, but Donald Trump is not well. We have been seeing his ankles swell. I mean, people want to see this man. We've seen the bruises on his hand. We've heard all of the stuff about Joe Biden, but we have a president who is physically showing his health, right? And people want to know if the president is okay on a daily basis. There's so many different things that go into covering a president. It's not just hearing what he has to say. It's the body knowledge. It's what he looks, his mood at the moment when he delivers a statement, or the way he looks. It's not just that simple. It's not something to get impacting quote. This is real. It's about, this is the president of the United States, the man who has worn peace and everything in between coming to that White House, and he's in communication with so many people around the world. He's we don't even call him that anymore, but he is the man who is at the center of world politics, at world humanity, at world thought. And so I believe we need to be there, even while the antics are underway.
Yeah.
Any comments from our other fellows on this?
The only comment.
Go ahead, David.
The only comment for me is interesting is the tension here is that one of the things I hear consistently in focus groups among swing voters is that the more the media will call him out, the more that there is this rejection and a reaction to it. That of course you're calling him out. You're against him from the beginning. You've always been against him. And so it's this really interesting dynamic where the line that journalists have to.
So am I against him, or are you talking about journalists in general, or are you talking about me?
No, journalists in general.
Okay.
Where the reaction literally is, you'll see people do this. You will show them either the clip or the article. They will say, which outlet is this?
Yes. Yes.
If you say New York Times, if you say NBC, CNN, whatever, well, of course they're going to say that. Because they've been against him from the beginning, which is one of the reasons among Republican voters, trust of journalism and media. The last data I saw is about 17%. The collapse has been driven essentially by that dynamic. How we get over that, I don't know, but that's the reality of what I hear on a weekly basis.
This is why I'm for a return to a single pool camera and one AP reporter and things like this. But we should move on. We got a lot to cover here. Bob,
Yeah.
you want to?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Jim,
Go ahead, Jim.
Jim, I'm about to call on you. So
I'll get just and we're not talking about Epstein or tariffs either anymore.
right.
Yeah.
So, Jim, I suspect you're involved in the ballot measure this November to redistrict California's congressional map. Can you talk about it? And how do you answer critics who say that this not only undermines California's historic redistricting reform, but who argue that the state is already malapportioned because Democrats already control a higher percentage of the congressional seats than their share of the popular vote in congressional districts if you aggregate it statewide?
Appreciate the fair and balanced question from our friends at Fox News. It's a good one. I would step back and say this isn't just about California. And this started with one quote. I got the highest vote in the history of Texas, as you probably know, and we are entitled to 5 more seats. So
Lyndon Johnson would be very surprised to hear that quote.
So from a perspective of Proposition 50, which is the initiative you're working on, and yes, I'm one of the leads working on this ballot measure. I think it's the dichotomy of what we're going to face in California is a ballot measure here. The one side, and I will say this, and I say this lovingly because that is exactly how Fox is framing it. It's exactly how Tucker Carlson is framing it. It is not about redistricting in California. And it truly is about, are we going to have checks and balances with the federal government? And the opportunity to not allow someone to rig the system, which is why it's called the Election Rigging Response Act. So there is no way for the opposite party to have a chance to win an election. And that's nationally. So for me, the ballot measure proper does a few things. Number one, it reaffirms California's commitment to independent national redistricting. And I'm sure I'm going to get the question. Yes, Gavin Newsom supports national redistricting, which I don't think will ever happen if we lose the House. 2, it calls for these maps, these emergency maps, to only happen if Texas moves forward. They've pulled that trigger. They're moving forward. So we are now responding. 3, they're temporary. And we've made that very clear. We're not getting rid of the Independent Redistricting Commission. All we're saying is until the new census comes out, these emergency maps would be placed into the field of play. And 4, and I think it's the most important thing, this is the most democratic process that one could ask for. We're asking Californians to vote on maps that they have already seen. That is not an Independent Redistricting Commission that's done that. It's not the legislature. People get the chance to vote on those maps. And to me, that's a vote for, do you want to have checks and balances? Do you want to have pushback of ICE and Border Patrol walking the streets? Do you want to protect women's reproductive rights? That's the opportunity that people in Texas aren't getting, nor will they get in Florida, nor will they get in Indiana. So to answer your question about whether or not the proportions are correct, we're talking about a president who has called for getting rid of all mail ballots in California, very clearly wants that done, which means suppressing people of color and their votes. And to make sure that he holds the House and continues with his version of what he views as the American way of life. So for me, there is no proportionality here. It's giving Californians the democratic opportunity that other people aren't getting to decide how they want to engage moving forward.
Jim, I have to do a follow-up here because Governor Newsom has kind of dominated Democratic news over the last several weeks. Can you talk about his new social media strategy, how it came about? Do you think it's working both for Democrats in general and for the governor in the remote event that he should decide to run for president in 2028?
Remote event.
What?
Indeed. Look, this is what I'll say. I was his chief of staff during the recall. And what we found in the recall was it was a nationalized race. And Mike knows all about recalls. And it was a special election. So the volume of which was coming into California. And we learned very quickly, if you're not fighting off your front foot and allowing the other side to frame what you're saying or doing, you're losing. And I think Governor Newsom has learned from that experience, and he's always now been a fighter. That's who people view him as. It's an interesting thing. He's probably not always the most lovable governor, but he's the guy that's out there fighting for everybody. And this social media thing has evolved over time, but I think it was the absurdity of what the president puts on his social media and just mimicking it that really caught on. And even so much so that Fox News will say things about how Gavin Newsom has, he's becoming childish, and we're literally imitating the president. And I think what it did for Democrats and a lot of folks and declined to states and people and anti-Trump Republicans was it brought a little bit of levity to a very, very serious situation. But it also pointed out, I think to April's point, how much things have changed and the ability to reach people very, very quickly. And I will tell you, the people who run his social media accounts are like 30-nothing-year-old assassins. And I love them to death for what they do.
Mike?
Well, quickly on the initiative, I think it's a horrible, terrible initiative that I plan to vote for. Simply because it is akin to it's like a police car running a red light and breaking the law, chasing a bank robber. That's really what we come down to. And I was part of Governor Schwarzenegger's, my client at the time's initiative to open it up. And we have a good process here. It's important for voters to remember, one, this is an attempt to take the incentive away from the Republicans for stealing 5 congressional seats by taking their win away. It's also temporary. This is like asking the voters to serve in the National Guard for a weekend. You will go home and we will go back to our system. There is no repeal here. This is a pause to deal with this Texas problem that Donald Trump, the same guy who called up, Governor Georgia and said, I need you to invent 20,000 votes to steal the presidency for me. Now he's trying to invent congressional things that thwart the will of the people. So I think any conservative, big C or small c, ought to support this to offset corruption, knowing that you're only voting for a pause, not a repeal, which is critical. On the other thing, I agree. New media is very important. I think the governor has to be careful with the podcast thing. I love the comedy Twitter feed. It's good for activists. But eventually, everybody run for president Democratic primary is going to be a Trump basher. And I think Trump will be in the rearview mirror in the smoking ruins. Whoever wins the argument for the future and stands apart, I think will have the jump in the presidential race. And I think Gavin's got a way to make some of those arguments, but he has work to do to get there uniquely.
Anyone else want to weigh in? If not,
I'll offer a comment, Bob, if I might. I guess I'm kind of agreeing with Mike that I think, look, I personally find Gavin Newsom's social media presence very, very entertaining, but there's got to be a ceiling to that. And is the point of politics to entertain sort of your base and to say, I'll be more silly about Trump than you are? I think there's just a ceiling to how far that gets you. So I think you want to add, it's okay to have that as a spice, but it shouldn't be your main dish, is what I'd say.
Well, and on that, what I'll say is, and David probably can chime in on this. This is the first time I've seen Democrats energized in a long time because they're fighting for something and not playing defense against something. And I think just from a perspective of, like I said, I went through the recall, which people begrudgingly came out to vote no because they thought it was foolish. There's anger, and the old Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go high. People are ready to go low. And they want to fight in a way that I have not seen in a very long period of time. So it's exciting from that perspective to have a national rallying cry. We've had over 250,000 small contributions from across 50 states. It's the way people are engaging.
And when you said, the Michelle Obama quote, when they go low, we go high. Yeah, I think she's even walked away from it a little bit because you could see there was something that she was talking about. Yeah, I gave somebody some hands. And she was signaling, this is that moment. Sometimes you got to meet people where they are. And you see Jasmine Crockett, you see Wes Moore, who just went viral talking about he was commander in chief, and now Gavin Newsom. People are concerned. Democrats are not fighting back like they want because we are in a crisis in this nation over democracy. Will we have a democracy? Will we have an America the way it used to be? Not making America great back in whenever that was, but an America that all of us remember, where we can rely on government, we can rely on our communities for services, etc. Things have changed.
The only thing I would add is that it's really to build on Frank and Mike's comment that this is good for now, but I think anyone that has a future running for president, especially when it comes to Latino vote, has to be very serious about the economic well-being of this country and have a very futuristic plan for what they're putting forward. So I see it every day with the young Latinas that I work with and the young people that I work with, is they want to be part of solutions and answers. And yes, I think this is a great way to get attention, but there has to be substance that follows.
All right. Frank, you were not only political director for Ronald Reagan, you were Undersecretary of Commerce in the George W. Bush administration and headed the international trade body when U.S. trade policy was very different than it is today. Can you make a case at all for President Trump's tariffs? And can you at least entertain the idea that some of this could benefit America?
Bob, I think it's very hard to make that case. By the way, Reagan was sort of in the mainstream of U.S. trade policy in that post-World War II era that lasted 50 years. Now, every president had their own approach, but every president agreed with the idea of incremental liberalization in some kind of structure that was more or less mutual, that all parties had to perform, had to do something, and countries that had more appetite for liberalization were going to liberalize. So we ended up with a series of free trade agreements. We ended up with GATT rounds, then WTO rounds, and we ended up with a pretty prosperous country, although, as Trump has pointed out, there's economic dislocation that can go with that. Trump really broke sharply with that. Not only did he say that's a bad idea, but he said everybody's guilty. This is kind of April's point, where he uses audacity as a management tool. He didn't just say, I want to take 5 or 10 countries that are the most predatory on trade and I want to sanction them and push back. He said every single country is predatory, is bad on trade, and we're going to sanction, we're going to put tariffs, universal global tariffs on countries where we had a free trade agreement, countries that had trade deficits with us, where we already enjoyed a trade surplus. So it's really quite a radical shift. And I do kind of back into April's conclusion to saying, look, he wants the friction. He wants the friction. And if you tell 100 different countries you're cheating us, maybe some of them will move your way. Maybe you get some benefit out of that. But boy, you're creating an enormous amount of ill will and problem and cost to the U.S. economy just to get a few people to correct what they're doing.
I have to ask you something about President Reagan.
Yeah.
He seemed to embody the politics of hope. And Democrats have done that too, Franklin Roosevelt, JFK. And President Reagan showed that while we might have differences, even big ones, we could and should respect one another. Is there room for that kind of politics in America today?
I think so. I think that's the model that helps the country, that not only gets you as a political figure to the finish line, but it also doesn't leave a residue of ill will or corrosive element for the body politic. So Reagan's view, I think just what you were articulating, Bob, was, look, no permanent enemies. If somebody's not supporting me on this legislation, it doesn't mean I hate that person or I want to attack that person. I might tell a joke about them, but that person might be with me on the next vote. I've got to have a working coalition, and I don't want to stigmatize or denigrate anybody because I've got to advance my agenda. So that doesn't leave anybody feeling chagrined or anybody on the outs. Now it's almost 100% playing to the base and then denigrating the other people. So it's a very, very different world than a generation ago.
Yeah, I witnessed the relationship between President Reagan and Senator Ted Kennedy. And while Kennedy could oppose him on all sorts of things, he looked for places where they could work together, and they got along pretty well. I mean,
I think so. I think there's a lot of respect. By the way, I remember, I don't remember which legislation this was. Reagan's having a dinner in the mansion, in the White House, with Senate leadership, R's and D's. And it's a frictional point. Everybody's sort of unhappy. Everybody's sort of in a low-level fist fight. And he announces when he invites everybody to dinner, the first thing we're going to do is go around the table, and I want every single person to tell us their favorite joke. And we're going to spend 5 or 10 minutes just everybody putting a joke out there. And I said, I thought that was genius because at least it changed the entire tone from here's what I don't like about you to let us find something in common and let us share a laugh. And whatever happens out of that, we're going to be in a little better position to move some kind of agenda ahead if we can do that.
Mike?
Well, I agree totally. I mean, we're going to have to either have a weak imitation in the Republican Party after Trump or a reformation. And I'm very interested in David's seminar about that. I think the problem is when you organize your campaign, your presidential campaign on "I'm right, you're evil," anything you do to the other side is heroic because they're evil. So how do you govern with that? How do you peel off 20 votes your first year to get anything done? You've left nothing but radioactive fallout. And I also believe that people like to vote for what they perceive they did not get the last time. And I think beyond the next president will be a reflection of the deficit people think they had from a reality show strongman. And that could go in a lot of ways. And I think that'll be a force of gravity in the next election, but we will see.
Mike, are you saying that there's maybe room for the more substantive sort of issue or the Bill Bradley or the Mitt Romney type candidate who has a...
Well, my riff on it, which is totally unfair to everybody involved, but we had George H.W. Bush, who was a classy guy, but he couldn't figure out a supermarket scanner. So we need somebody who understands us. So we went to the trailer park and got Bill Clinton, who understood us all too well. And he had a good run. But then we're having parties in the White House and scandals. So we got to go get a square from the Bush family. We get George W. Everybody loves him. Boom. Then wait a minute. He got us in a war and he's not that smart. He talks funny. So now we need a genius law professor. So we got a genius law professor who was incredibly inspiring and could really communicate. But then he got all tangled up with red lines and getting pushed around. So we got the tough guy who fired Gilbert Gottfried on The Apprentice. There's this kind of rotating. So I think there will be rotational energy. I don't know who captures it because there are a lot of contrasts with Trump. You could have the low-key guy. That was kind of Biden's thing. Your kids can watch the news again. Or you could have the genius rebuilder. Or you could have the hero of the middle class coming out of all the rubble. So I don't know what it is. I just know the wheel likes to turn.
Do any of the other fellows want to weigh in on this? And David, I'm going to turn to you in a minute. So you might want to comment on it too.
I'll say this. I think we're talking about presidential politics. There is an election coming up that will have consequences to the administration. And if the House does change, there are checks and balances that'll be, and that like from a Prop 50 perspective, and I know presidential politics is sexier to talk about, but there's real implications with what happens in the midterms. And I don't, we're jumping ahead so far. I mean, we could talk about the governor's race in California and all those things, but we're jumping to the presidential very quickly. And if I know anything about politics for the last 25 years, what is popular today can be completely different tomorrow. And the iterations of what that wheel that Mike's talking about, that's going to spin and spin and spin, it's going to spin 400 more times before we get to the presidential primaries. So one step ahead of me is like, the midterms matter immensely. And I think we just jumped right over that.
Well, and I want to hang a lantern on what you just said. These midterms are really important because if it's a wave election, if the Dems get the House, which I think they're more likely to do, they get the budget process, everything changes, and they get investigatory committees. It's going to be a huge shockwave. And I'm one who does not think the Senate, at least a tie, is totally out of reach for the Democrats now. So I agree about the midterms.
So, David, you've worked at the highest level of Democratic politics in what is arguably a more successful time for the party. How do you assess the state of the party now? The competing visions of what messages the party should pursue, and the often antipodal visions of how to position Democrats for victories in 2026 and 2028?
Yeah, I'm so glad that last piece, Bob. I remember one of the presidential debates in 2020, and there was a question about decriminalizing the border. And almost every hand went up, yes, with the exception, I believe, of Joe Biden and maybe someone else. The hands went up because of an assessment among the candidates about what the activist base and perhaps overlearning a lesson of what had happened in 2018 dictated the way they were going to approach 2020. Completely wrong, with some pretty damning consequences going forward. And so first question for me around Democrats that I always wrestle with is like, what Democrats are we talking about? Are we talking about Democratic primary voters? And if you are, what part of the country are you talking about? Democratic primary voters versus the activist base. So there's this one chart that some old colleagues of mine at a research firm do on issue salience. And they take 40 issues, and rather than saying what's important to you, they do bake-offs. Poverty versus crime, crime versus climate, climate versus guns, etc. And over the past 4 years, inflation, cost of living, and the economy have never deviated from the top three. What's been in the bottom, number 40, 39, 38, and 37? Climate, student loans, LGBTQ issues, and a variety of other issues that are more related to the Democratic activist class. Now, I'm not giving you a normative judgment. I'm just saying what the data shows. If you just then go among progressive Democrats and do the same chart, those bottom 3 or 4 only go to the middle. And so what I see right now with the party, and there's this one focus group anecdote that just sticks with me about the lead up into 2024. And I think, Bob, we did this at a panel last year, where there was this woman who voted Democratic her entire life. And she didn't know what she was going to do. And the moderator, a good friend of Jim and mine, said, all right, everybody, write down one word for Democrats and one word for Republicans. And this woman wrote her words, and then she said, okay, Republicans, crazy. Democrats, preachy. Moderator, how are you good? What are you going to do? And those both seem pretty bad. She's like, I'm probably going to go with crazy because crazy doesn't think they're better than I am. There is a disconnect among working class and blue collar voters that have, for me, as the son of Portuguese immigrants that went to a factory town in southeastern Massachusetts, that was the Democratic Party, focused on kitchen table issues relentlessly. And I think that's the challenge right now that we're facing. Now, there are some green shoots. So yesterday, there was a state Senate race in Iowa where the Democrat won. Really good news. Well, here's the other bit of the news. There are 48,000 registered voters in that district. 9,000 people voted. Yes, it's a win. Yes, it breaks the supermajority. Yes, learn the lessons. But don't learn them beyond essentially the remit that you have been given. And so the antipodal nature of this, Bob, is something that I'm very, very focused on. And then one thing around the seminar, even when you hear like Frank talking about tariffs, it'll be an interesting question whether Democratic candidates for president, especially around some of my friends in labor, who have wanted a tariff regime for a very long time, say, really? You're going to step back into some kind of neoliberal free trade agenda that decimated parts of the country. That'll be separation from Trump, yes, but there will be pieces in this weird way. What just happened with Intel? There were some friends of mine on the left who were saying, I like that model. What is the permission structure in terms of economic policy that, interestingly, the president may have created for Democratic candidates in 2026 and 2028 to gravitate around, which is why this moment of definition for the two parties, not just Republicans, of what they evolve to, but the fight among Democrats is going to be epic in terms of the direction of the party. And 2026 is the sneak preview of that.
Can I just add, by the way, that I think a lot of Democrats forgot the reality that economic issues were the engine that brought the train up the hill. Social issues, which I am deeply committed to, were the caboose. If you try to make the caboose the engine, it won't get up the hill.
Bob, last night, because I'm unwell in this way, where like if there's a focus group to watch, I will watch it. Last night, there was a woman in Eastern Ohio who was talking about, she's got 3 kids. It takes $250 to fill her grocery cart, and it's not even to the top. She said, I think that I'm being played for a sucker by the end of the week, and I dread that my car is going to break. Who's talking about that? Nobody. I hoped, her words, not mine, that Trump would focus on this. But he's focused on just about everything else. And I don't ever hear Democrats talking about it. That's the tension that elected Trump.
Mike, you got to get on a plane in a few minutes. You want to add something here? I think Mike nailed it.
I couldn't agree more. Kitchen table economics all the way. You know, the elites of the Democratic Party have gotten very into identity. And meanwhile, well, as you say, about a third of America go into poverty if they have a $650 car repair bill and very little savings. So, you know, the real life, you see it in all the data about how pessimistic people are about the future and their kids having a better or even equal life today. So I agree. It's the huge resonant chord. And I think you got to be careful if you're Democrats after the midterm cycle about being lured into relitigating Trump and not instead have a path forward for the American middle class. Yeah, I apologize. I've got to run to a flight, but should I throw the next question to Helen, Bob, or how do you want to proceed?
Sure, go ahead.
It's a great question. So I'll add a little and then I'll rudely have to leave during your answer, but it's going to be so good. I know, you know, that it's already done. Helen, so Donald Trump saw a significant increase in support in the Latino community in 2024, and there were even earlier signs than that. Will the ICE raids be a meaningful change, or is this more of a kitchen table thing than an identity thing? Because I saw even in 16, places like Dade County and border Texas start to move, particularly male blue collar Latinos, liking Trump's populism. So where do you think we are? And what's the recipe for the Democrats to get competitive with the group? I think on identity, they took a little for granted.
Yeah, so I think right now where we're at is the polling is showing that Donald Trump is down to like 37% unfavorable or favorable ratings. So his unfavorable ratings are much higher than where we started in the beginning of this year. And that is all down to the economy. Not all. There, obviously, the ICE raids has really been a concern because what we're seeing is that if you're brown, you're going to be picked up. That this is not about citizenship at all. And so that is a threat to the community. But what the community, for the most part, when we're looking at some of the polls, they're responding to the fact that they're not being heard around the economy. So I think kitchen table politics is going to be really important in the Latino community. I would also just wanted to really point out that almost 1.4 million Latinos every year are eligible to vote. And half of those are Latinas, of course. So, and in the battleground states of Arizona, Nevada, California, well, California hasn't been a battleground state, but in some of the larger states, 20% of that vote is Latina votes. So getting this right for either party is going to be incredible. I wanted to add to David's analogy. I always thought that the Republican Party did a really good job of making Latinos villains, and the Democrats have done a really good job of making us victims. So that has to be corrected. There has to be a different narrative for the Latinos that I interact with every day. That's not the narrative that we prescribe to, and both parties have to do a much better job. But right now, I would say that Trump has a lot more work to do to regain the ground that he did make during this past election.
So you're strongly committed to encouraging young Hispanic women of both parties to get involved in politics. And we're proud to partner with you on that, by the way.
Thank you.
So you spend a lot of time with young people. Are they hopeful or cynical about our politics?
A little bit of both. What I'll say is that the young people that I work with, they're the most confident that I have seen in a long time about their own ability. They really truly have a vision for their leadership, but they're very cynical about the systems. They don't want the status quo. They want things to be changed. They don't think the current leadership has the answers for what woes them, but they believe they do. So it's really about how do we create an environment where young voices are not only being heard, but that we actually act on the agenda that they are putting forward.
Yep. Anyone else want to weigh in on this?
The thing on young voters that I love is, and there's some new data on this around the youngest folks right now, are more optimistic than the same cohort who is going through the pandemic. And so even coming out of that, you're beginning to see a different orientation. And then the voter registration data. So good news for Republicans. We're across the country. Even among youngest voters, they're doing very well. Bad news for Democrats. But the main story is the youngest voter saying, I'm not buying what either one of these two groups are saying. You need to show me. And for me, that's also a function of this being a generation being totally digitally native that has access to everything. And so the platitudes from a party or a talking point or a slick video, they're like, whatever. I'm going to call you out if I think you're full of it. And so that's the other thing to add on them from my perspective.
Yeah, and David, I think that speaks to the confidence that the young voter has in themselves that, quite frankly, I haven't seen in other generations. They are confident that they can be the current leaders and the future leaders. So they want to have different solutions and they want to be part of those solutions. They don't just want to be preached to. They want to be part of this. And I think that's what's exciting.
So I'm going to turn to some of the input from the audience. And I have to begin with a comment directed at me. So as moderator, you're pressing for a return to normalcy after Trump. Yikes. My only answer to that is that Donald Trump would be the first person to agree with me, I think, that he's not a normal president. He said he was there to fight the deep state. He said he's there to make some fundamental changes. He tells the press corps off regularly. I think he'd probably take it as a compliment to say that he's not the normal run of presidents. I don't know what anybody else thinks about that, but I don't think he'd be offended. So here's a question. It's for all of you. On behalf of the Center's Advisory Board, thank you for coming to USC for this semester. My question is, do any of you think that there could be a veto-proof majority in the House after the 2026 election? Helen's shaking her head no.
I don't see it.
No, I don't. I'm hopeful that we can keep our checks and balances, and that's a lot of what I appreciated what Jim really spelled out. And if we get to that place, that's going to be a win. So, but I don't see a veto proof.
Yeah, the world is obviously things are going to change dramatically, but just some of the basic averages I've seen and just doing comparisons. The generic ballot right now has about a 3.5 to 4 point Democratic lead. Good for them. So at this point in Trump won, it was a 9 point Democratic lead. If you map out what a 4 point lead could do, assuming it doesn't move very much, then you're talking about maybe a Democratic majority at 225, 226. 227, which is why the redistricting play has been fascinating from Texas 5, Florida 2, Ohio 3, Kansas 1, Missouri 1, Indiana 1. So that's plan A. California checks that. Plan B, are there some of the states in the South who can engage? And based upon the Supreme Court hearing on October 15th on the Louisiana case, what happens if the court overturns Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act? That's another 3, potentially 4 seats across the South. That then takes that generic ballot 225, 227, 228, and all of a sudden brings it back. But everything I've seen essentially says that you're playing within this tight parameter of control, at least for the foreseeable future.
And just to add to what Dave said, but the fact that we're having a discussion about having to redistrict the country mid-decade to rig elections is jarring. And like we're talking about it in normal speak. Like these are things that had we talked about this in any other presidency, be it Obama, Bush, Clinton, Biden, etc., people would have, I mean, even when I started with this, I laughed it off. There's no way this is going to happen. And now we're having an intellectual discussion about something that's so absurd. And I agree with Mike Murphy. We're doing something in California because we have to, not because we want to. And the fact that we're even having this discussion like this today, in 5 years ago, 5 months ago, we would have thought was crazy.
Diane Wallace, you asked that question, and my answer would be the structure of Congress as it exists, with the Supreme Court giving permission to states to gerrymander, saying the only solution is for Congress to enact a law against gerrymandering, makes it impossible, I think, for either party to get a supermajority in the House of Representatives. I just don't see that happening. The age of Franklin Roosevelt is not returning. Next question is from Thomas Daly. He says, I see and hear radio and TV ads about Trump's success with illegal immigration. He seems to feel that this success will win him lots of votes. Do you agree?
I
Go ahead, Frank.
Bob, I divide this into at least 2, maybe 3 components. One is border control. Should there be border controls or not, where I think Biden was just a calamity of a failure, and Trump has exercised executive power to put in border control. So that's one, but that's one component. A second component is deportation, where I think American public is very split on what Trump is doing, even if they agree to partially with what he's doing. There's not, I don't think he enjoys a consensus for mass deportation. So I think he can easily undo with a very aggressive deportation approach whatever goodwill he might have gotten in the first component. And he doesn't seem, he occasionally equivocates and talks about farm labor, talks about other kind of needs, but he hasn't really spelled out yet what he does in favor. And his problem is he's empowered this sort of ICE leadership taking a very aggressive approach. So I don't think that ends up helping him on a net basis. By the way, the Dems have the same problem in my view. The Dems still suffer a legacy of saying we blew it with Biden, we blew it with the border. And then there's at least a vocal segment of the Dems who say no deportations, nobody, sanctuary city, nobody who did anything is going to be deported. So that's also off-putting, I think, to the voter. So they don't necessarily get a win out of that.
David or Jim?
Look, I'll come at it from a California perspective. I've served as chief of staff in both administrations, Trump and Biden, for Governor Newsom. And coming into this, when Trump was reelected, the idea that that this was only going to be people who had committed crimes, and then the White House press secretary from the dais said that anybody here illegally is committing a crime. And even up till 2 weeks ago, when we did our press conference at the Japanese Democracy Center in downtown Los Angeles, where we used to intern people, and Border Patrol showed up and arrested somebody selling strawberries. This isn't what I think certainly California is expected. So even if you're pro securing the border and we're trying to stop movement of fentanyl and other pieces, and scaring Californians, scaring American citizens, terrorizing them in some places, detaining them in others, and going after people who legitimately, in California at least, help with the economy, from farm workers to laborers. I mean, I don't know how LA is going to be rebuilt now, to be honest with you. That's not what Californians expected, even if they are pro-border security. That is a far leap from what any of us expected, even from this administration. And sometimes I think we have to believe what we hear and see now. That was something I think with Trump, that he says a lot of things that people didn't expect was going to happen. And he has gone over and beyond, I think, what most people thought would happen here.
David,
Go
go ahead. I was going to ask you specifically, where does immigration rank on those 40 issues you were talking about? And is Trump getting credit for, is it a political home run for him to be engaging in this kind of deportation policy, like the Stephen Miller policy?
It's dropped in salience over the past 6 months, because when you listen to Republican voters, it is now no longer up near the top where it was, because what they will say is he is doing exactly what he said he was going to do, and I'm happy about it. So there's been a reduction. Among swing voters, it's the classic Trump problem. It's less the what, it's the how. It's the excess, where they will say, look, anyone who came in over the past 4 years should go. But why are you focused on folks who have been here 10, 15, 20 years who are trying to make a go out of it, right? That's the thing that's always, just about Bob, on just about any issue with the president. His instinct for finding salience and resonance at a given moment, high. The excess that he brings to it, on the one hand, keeps the base, which is the antipodal dynamic on his side, but just then serves to push people away in a really interesting thing. Crime is the one that's rising in a way that Democrats need to be very mindful of. And I view what's happening.
You're froze, David. You
right
froze. Okay, good. Go. You're fine.
So crime has been rising, and I view what's happening in DC right now as essentially the opening salvo in an increased salience around crime as a focus into the midterms, in the positioning around Democrats, mayors, and governors have accepted a level of crime that's unacceptable to us. And if you're not going to do something about it, we're going to do something about it. I think that's the next turn of the wheel.
Yeah, and the irony
David,
is,
I was just going to say that and perhaps you were thinking about this too, Bob, is the irony is that crime has been going down. And I think this is a great example of how Democrats consistently don't know how to control the narrative. And they don't know how to talk to everyday people and really understand their experiences. And Republicans really know how to create the boogeyman out there. Not to say there's not some truths to all of it across the board, but I'm very excited to hear more about the research and the focus groups that you've been conducting, David, because I think it just keeps on proving that if we don't get in our messaging correct, we're always going to be in a state of limbo in this country and not really protecting democracy and not really creating opportunities, but just in plain limbo.
Yeah. Thomas Daly, that was a great question, and I apologize that we can't get to many more of the audience questions. What a terrific panel. What a fascinating panel. What a fascinating group of fellows. I want to thank them, and I want to thank everyone who will hear or see this discussion. on our podcast, YouTube, wherever. Please join us on campus or remotely on September 11th for our next program, Gen Z and Democracy, Disillusioned and Disengaged, ? Which promises to be both incisive and exciting. Good day, and welcome to the next chapter in the work of the center. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.